Salam, peace be upon you. We are walking at night through a city you know so well you could cross it with your eyes closed. And yet, tonight, the city has no street names, no north, no east, no clocks on the walls, no signs that say time, space, or motion. There is only one thing you're allowed to carry in your hands: a small circular dial with a single mark on it, like a ring with a notch. And everywhere you go in the city, at every event, that dial shows a position on the circle. Not a meter reading, not a timestamp, not a coordinate, just a phase, an angle around the ring. That is phi, the hollow phase, a rule that assigns to each event in our minimal support X a point on a circle S1. That was our silent letter. And we refuse to pretend it has an absolute zero. We refuse to pretend the universe cares where you painted the start on your ring. A global shift of phase is not structure, it is relabeling. That was our first discipline. Then we learned to unwrap the circle locally where unwrapping is allowed. We introduced the local lift, phi tilde, the unwrapped version of phi on a patch where the circle can be treated like a line without lying to ourselves. We did not introduce a new reality, only a lawful way to speak. Then we took the first derivative of that lift, and we named it A, defined as A equals d phi tilde. Not because we love symbols, because it is the first thing you can say that is automatically public. Shift phi tilde by a constant, A does not change. Shift phi tilde by a whole term multiple of 2 pi times an integer, A does not change. A is what remains when you remove the private choices. Then we learn to speak in finite jets, j, n, phi at a point x, the finite stack of derivatives of phi tilde up to order n, wherever the patch is smooth enough. The alphabet. Then we froze what counts as a local sentence. O of x equals f of j n phi of x on a declared domain D. No more vague metaphysics. No more claims that do not say where they hold and how deep they look. Then we installed transformation grammar. If two charts describe the same overlap, jets must translate by lawful rules. Meaning is not the coordinate spelling, but the equivalence class under permitted redescriptions. We allowed many descriptions, we forbade many realities. Now comes part 12. This is the part where we name something listeners have been feeling since episode 5, but we have not yet allowed ourselves to speak plainly inside the PS0 language. We name the triunity readout: time, space, motion. But we do it without cheating. We do not add time as a container. We do not add space as a stage. We do not add motion as a third substance that flows through space and time. We do not put three things beside phi. We do something far more disciplined and far more beautiful. We show that what people call time, space, and motion are three inseparable readouts of the same single first derivative object, A. A is the stem. Omega, kappa, nu are shadows. They are not new fields. They are not extra primitives. They are ways of reading one thing once a frame of reading becomes licensed. And the only way we are allowed to speak those names in this language is if we can always recombine them back into A. That recombination is the oath. If you forget the oath, triunity becomes a lie. It becomes three independent stories. It becomes the old world again, where we pretend time, space, and motion are separate bricks. Part 12 exists to prevent that forever. Let me make you feel it before we formalize it. Imagine you are listening to a single violin note held steady in a quiet room. At first, it seems like one thing, just a tone. But if you listen more carefully, You can describe that same tone in three inseparable ways. You can describe its rhythm, the cadence of its oscillation, how fast it cycles. You can describe its texture, how the sound changes across the room, the way it forms patterns of louder and quieter places. You can describe its transport, how the sound energy seems to drift and carry as reflections and air currents move it. You might call these three different things, but they are not three different sounds. They are three readings of one wave pattern, one vibrating reality. If you recorded all three readings, you could recombine them into one description of the sound field. If your three readings could not be recombined, then at least one of them was not a true reading. It was an artifact of your microphone placement or your chosen coordinate system. Triunity is exactly this, but for A. A is the first derivative word, the field of phase change on a lift-valid patch. It is a single geometric object, independent of the chart's accent. But when you choose a way to speak inside that patch, a way to separate directions of variation, A can be read in three inseparable projections that feel to us like temporal cadence, spatial texture, and kinematic transport. We name them omega, kappa, nu. Omega, the cadence aspect, the part of A that reads like how quickly phase advances along the direction we will later read as time. Kappa, the texture aspect, the part of A that reads like how phase changes across directions we will later read as space. Nu, the transport aspect, the mixed carry, the convective kinematic aspect that appears whenever your reading frame is not frozen and you are not pretending there is a perfect separation. But hear me, those are not definitions of new primitives. Those are interpretations of one object under a chosen reading frame. The truth we install is this. You can change the frame and omega kappa nu will change, but A must remain the same, and omega kappa nu must always be recomposable into A. That is triunity readout. Now, because we are being strict, we must say something very clearly once, and then we will carry it quietly in the background for the rest of the episode. Episode 13b exists because we cannot begin differentiation or cosmogenesis until the listener knows the language. We are freezing the PS0 alphabet and grammar. We are not doing dynamics, not doing measurement protocols, not doing data or instruments, not doing laws of motion, not doing cosmology narrative. That is later. Here, we are only installing what can be said. So the triunity readout in part 12 is not a claim about what the universe is made of. It is a rule about what counts as a lawful decomposition of A in our language. Now let's build the discipline slowly, in a way you can carry. We start with the only place triunity can even appear, where A exists. A exists only on a lift-valley domain. That means we have a patch P, we have a local lift phi tilde defined on P, and P is typed at least C1, smooth enough to speak first derivatives. If we are near a defect or a cut or a place where lifting fails, we do not pretend. We excise, or we stay silent, or we speak only topological facts. So the first guardrail is already in place. No A, no triunity readout. We cannot talk about omega or kappa or nu in a region where A itself is not defined. That is not harsh, it is honesty. Now, within such a domain, A is a one form, a thing that eats a direction of displacement and returns a number. You do not need to know the formal term one form to understand the meaning. Think of A as a device that tells you how much phi tilde changes if you move a tiny bit this way. Give it a direction, it tells you the change. This is crucial. A does not presuppose a metric. It does not presuppose distances. It does not presuppose time. It is just directional change. Now, how do omega kappa nu arise? They arise the moment you choose a way to split directions into three kinds of reading. Not three substances, three reading channels. In ordinary speech, we do this instinctively. We say time direction and space direction and motion. But in holophase, we are not allowed to assume those are fundamental. They must be readouts. So we proceed like this. We acknowledge that on a local patch, we can pick a frame of description, a local coordinate chart, and a local way of organizing directions. This is not adding a new primitive. It is using the translation grammar of part 11. Many spellings, one meaning. Given such a frame, A has components, and those components can be grouped into three inseparable readouts that correspond to a cadence readout, how A projects along the chosen evolution direction, a texture readout, how A projects across the chosen transverse directions, a transport readout, the mixed term that appears when the chosen evolution direction is not orthogonal to the chosen transverse structure in the naive way people imagine, or when you are in a moving frame. If you've ever been on a boat in a river, you have felt this. You can describe the river in three inseparable ways. There is the current's rate, how fast the water cycles past you, cadence. There is the river's spatial gradient, how the flow varies across the width, texture. And there is your boat's motion relative to the bank, transport. If you define your time by the boat's clock and your space by the bank's coordinates, you will see mixing. The same water's flow will show up differently depending on your frame. The mixing is not an extra substance. It is the consequence of a frame choice. Holophase turns that everyday truth into a law of language. Omega, kappa, nu are not things in addition to A. They are frame-dependent projections of A that must reassemble into A. Now we must install the four gates for part 12 as living rules of language hygiene. First, the well-formedness gate. In part 12, a sentence that uses omega, kappa, or nu is only well-formed if it includes the recomposition rule back to A. That rule does not have to be written every time, but it must be satisfied. It means anytime you name omega, you are also implicitly naming the rest of A. You are not allowed to speak omega as if it floats alone. In ordinary terms, you are not allowed to tear a chord into one note and pretend the chord has become that note. So if someone says omega is the true field of time, the well-formedness gate rejects it immediately. Omega is not a primitive field. Omega is a readout. The primitive is A, and omega must be a projection of A under a chosen readout frame. Similarly, if someone says kappa is the true field of space, the language rejects it. Kappa is a shadow. The stem is A. And if someone says nu is the true field of motion, same rejection. The well-formedness gate does not debate. It simply says, show the recomposition. Show that your omega, kappa, nu are truly readouts that reconstruct A. If you cannot, you are not speaking holophase language. Second, the invariance gate. In part 12, every sentence written in omega, kappa, nu must be rewritable purely in A language, and therefore must inherit A's invariances under the allowed equivalences of the lift. Remember, phi tilde is not unique. You can add a constant, you can add 2 pi times an integer. Those changes must not affect meaning. A is invariant under those changes. So if omega, kappa, nu are true readouts of A, they must not introduce dependence on those private choices. If a sentence about omega changes when you shift the lift by a whole turn, then omega was not computed from A. It was computed from the raw lift value. That would be coordinate perfume, not structure. So the invariance gate forces this. Omega kappa new sentences must be A clean. Third, the domain gate. In part 12, readouts are defined only where A is defined. We have already said it, but now we make it a gate. If you are outside the lift valid domain, omega kappa nu are undefined. If you are on a patch that is not C1, omega kappa nu are undefined. If the patch is excised due to a defect, omega kappa nu may only be discussed on the excised domain, not through the defect core. This gate prevents the most common cheap trick in physics, taking a decomposition that is valid in smooth regions and forcing it across singularities, then calling the resulting blowup fundamental. Holophase forbids that. If your domain ends, your sentence ends. Silence is not failure, it is discipline. Fourth, the non-encodability challenge. If someone insists that time, space, or motion must be primitives, they must produce a structure that cannot be obtained as an A readout. They must show a non-encodable token, something that cannot be written in PS0 terms. But the holophase claim is strong. Time, space, motion are not primitives. They are the threefold readability of A. So the burden is on the person who wants to add new containers. They must show a public statement that requires time as a separate primitive beyond A. Not it feels that way. Not it's standard. A grammar level necessity. Now we can state the grammatical prediction and falsifier of part 12. The prediction is simple. The apparent independence of time, space, and motion is an artifact of forgetting they are readouts. Most philosophical confusion comes from promoting shadows into substances. And the falsifier is even sharper. Produce a PS0 sentence that specifies omega while holding A fixed. In other words, find a way to change omega without changing A within the allowed equivalences. If you can do that, omega is not a readout. It is a new primitive, and triunity collapses. This falsifier is not an empirical experiment. It is a grammatical impossibility claim. If omega is truly a projection of A, you cannot vary it while keeping A fixed. Any such attempt either changes A or smuggles in extra structure. Now let's make all of this feel breathtakingly obvious through a few images that land in the body. First image, the lighthouse. A lighthouse sends out a rotating beam. The beam's phase is the angle of rotation. Now imagine the coastline as x, and at every point the beam has a phase, phi. If you unwrap that phase locally and differentiate, you get A, how the beam's phase changes as you move or as you wait. Now if you stand still and watch, you experience cadence, the beat of the beam passing you again and again. That cadence is omega-like. If you walk along the shore, you experience texture, the way the phase changes across space. That texture is kappa-like. If you are on a moving boat, your experience mixes these. The cadence you feel depends on both the lighthouse's rotation and your motion across phase contours. That mixing is new-like. But the beam is one beam. The phase field is one field. The derivative A is one object. Omega, kappa, nu are how one object is read under different directions of experience. You cannot make omega true while making kappa false. They come from one stem. Second image, the woven carpet. Imagine a carpet with a repeating motif, like a cycle. Phi assigns to each location in the weave where you are in the cycle of the motif. If you move along one direction in the weave, the motif phase advances. If you move across another, the phase changes differently. The derivative A tells you how the motif phase changes in every direction. Now, if you choose one direction in the weave as your progress direction, You can call the phase change along that direction omega, cadence. The phase change across the weave you can call kappa, texture. And if you are weaving while the loom itself is moving, your progress direction is not purely along threads. It drifts. That drift is nu, transport. But again, the weave is one weave. The motif is one motif. A is one object. Triunity is the unavoidable threefold readability of that one object. Third image, the choir chord. A single singer holds one note. That is not a chord. But a choir holds a chord. Three notes sounding together. Now imagine something subtle. The chord is one musical event, but you can read it in three channels. Its rhythm, when the beat cycles, its harmony, how pitches relate, and its motion, how the chord changes as voices slide. Those channels are not independent. If you change the chord, you change all three. If you somehow changed only the rhythm while keeping the chord fixed, you did not keep the chord fixed. You changed the event. Triunity is that constraint for A. Omega, kappa, nu are three channels of one event. Now, because we are building a language, not a metaphor, we must say the central identity plainly in words, without relying on symbols the listener cannot see. We have phi is a mapping from X to S1. Phi tilde is a local lift from a patch P to the real line R, such that wrapping phi tilde back to the circle reproduces phi on that patch. A is defined as the differential of phi tilde. A equals d phi tilde. Triunity says omega, kappa, nu are readouts of A, not additions to A. That means whenever we speak omega, kappa, nu, we are speaking components or projections of A under a chosen local frame, and we must be able to recombine them to get A again. We are not allowed to claim omega exists beside A, or that kappa exists beside A, or that nu exists beside A. The primitive object at first derivative level is A. Now, you might feel a deep question rising here. If omega, kappa, nu depend on a frame of reading, how can they be public? This is exactly why part 11 had to come first. Public does not mean independent of any description. Public means the equivalence class is shared and translatable. You and I can choose different frames and still compare by translation. The invariant object is A. The readouts are projections under a frame. The relation between readouts is governed by transformation grammar. If we follow the rules, the differences between our omega and your omega are not disagreements. They are coordinate spellings. The public content is in A and in the invariant statements built from it. This is how holophase avoids the false dilemma that has haunted physics for centuries. Either you pick one privileged frame as real, or you say everything is relative and nothing is real. Holophase chooses a third path. One structure is real. Many spellings are allowed. Meaning is what survives translation. Now let's place triunity into the larger arc, briefly without reteaching everything. From episode 1 onward, we refused to start with particles, space-time, fields, energy as substance, or laws. We installed humility. We reframed energy as tali, a derived report, not an ontic fluid. We learned that reality answers calculus-like questions. It is readable as change patterns. We built the derivative hierarchy. We learned representation independence. We built grammar that forces prediction and falsification as a spine. We built a firewall. Episode 13a showed that undifferentiated phi is permission, not substance. It is irreducible as public ground. No absolutes, no containers, no teleology. Episode 13b is the language reveal. We are freezing the alphabet and grammar so we cannot cheat later when we write differentiation and cosmogenesis. And triunity is the hinge. It is the moment where the listener realizes what we called time, space, and motion are not extra scaffolding. They are the threefold readability of the first derivative word. Now I want to press the most important consequence into your memory, because it changes everything that comes later. If time, space, and motion are readouts, then you cannot build a theory by adding time dynamics on top of space geometry as separate foundations. You must build everything from A and the jet towers that refine A. Any later time equation or space curvature or motion law must be rewritable in A language. This does not reduce richness, it compresses it. It is the difference between having three unrelated alphabets and having one alphabet with three reading channels. Now we must do one last act of clarity. People often think triunity means there are three dimensions. That is not what we are saying here. The word dimension is overloaded. In part 12, we are not asserting a fixed count of coordinates. We are asserting a fixed count of inseparable readout channels for the first derivative stem: cadence, texture, transport. Those channels can exist even if your patch has many coordinates. They are not one coordinate each. They are modes of reading. Cadence: a chosen evolution direction, how phase changes along it. Texture: how phase changes across a chosen family of transverse directions. Transport: the mixing that appears when your evolution direction and transverse structure are not cleanly separable, or when you change frames. In many familiar physical settings, these align with what people call time, space, motion. But in the PS0 language, they're not assumed. They're extracted as consistent readouts. Now let's seal part 12 in one carry-forward sentence. Here is what you must carry. Omega, kappa, nu are not things beside phi. They are three inseparable readouts of one first derivative stem A, and any sentence that uses them must be recomposable back to A, invariant under allowed redescriptions, and spoken only on domains where A exists. That is the firewall. And now the bridge forward. We have the silent letter phi, the leaf discipline phi tilde, the first derivative stem A, the finite jets as alphabet, the public local sentence form, the transformation grammar on overlaps, and now the triunity readout as one stem. What comes next is the natural question. If omega, kappa, nu are readouts, how do we extract them in a way that never forgets invariance and never confuses chart spelling with structure? The next part will tighten the discipline further. We will make the triunity readout operational as language, still without measurement protocols, still without dynamics, so that any future use of time-like, space-like, or motion-like can be audited back to A and tested for coherence on overlaps. We are building the language that cannot lie. And this is the moment where the listener stops seeing three worlds and starts seeing one stem, three shadows, one reality, three echoes, forever inseparable. Always, peace be upon.